let me start by making a few remarks about what has been happening in D.C. for the past month. And then we'll go to the phone line to take questions. If you can call in, press star 3 at any time you want to ask a question. As you all know, we have a new president, Donald Trump. He promised to challenge the status quo, to be a positive disruptor. And that's what's happening. Every federal agency is being looked at from top to bottom as the new cabinet members get into place. Some of it's been rocky, but overall we have a government that is pushing to give people more freedom and to create more jobs. I was at the inauguration and I've been at a number of meetings with President Trump. He made clear that the normal pace of Washington will not be tolerated. I think we're all learning firsthand that he's a man of action. The Trump way is to get things done under budget and ahead of schedule. There's a lot of energy, there's a lot of anticipation, and a lot of determination. I recognize that we must get things done. A couple of weeks ago, we held a 3-day retreat in Philadelphia for all of the Republican members. It was House and Senate, and we, during that retreat, agreed to a 200-day plan. It goes from now to August. It's a very aggressive plan, moving quickly to repeal or replace Obamacare, roll back the regulatory burden, pass real tax reform, rebuild our infrastructure, keep this country safe and secure. Before I go into those plans, though, I'd like to say something about the divisiveness that is in our country now. Usually after an election, the country comes together and unites, but it's not what's happening. And I know that there's people on this call that are those that we have voted for Donald Trump and those that didn't. People have strong disagreements. But I do believe it is better if we can try to find common ground. We shouldn't stay in campaign mode for the next 4 years. In these times, it is important that we remember that what unites is what we have in common. And I really believe that America is the country that no matter your background, you walk of life, this is where you can pursue your dreams. Your country's motto is pluribus unum, means one out of many. Reminder that America is greatest and strongest when we work together, despite our differences. And I am committed to doing my part as your representative. I am committed to working with people from across Eastern Washington and the entire country to find common ground on our values of liberty and equality of opportunity. During the past few weeks, the House has passed a dozen laws to cut the federal red tape, roll back regulations. We've canceled new regulations on finance, natural resources, jobs, energy, and healthcare. These are regulations that have been imposed over the last few years, costing nearly $1 billion. A record number of regulations. And at the end of the day, public policy, the lawmaking, is to take place in the House and the Senate. But unfortunately, we've seen many more public policy decisions in recent years written by federal agencies through rules and regulations. And I believe that we must restore the lawmaking to where it belongs, and the public policy to where it belongs in the House and the Senate. We've used a law called the Congresswoman-Review Act. It's only been used once before, which is a tool that allows us to go back 60 days and to take action on rules that have been finalized. Clearly, there's a lot on the schedule. There's a lot for us to accomplish. Despite all the noise, I believe that it's just most important that I stay focused on being the best representative that I can be for the people of Eastern Washington. Listening to people from every corner, all 10 counties of this district, learning, and then leading. And I am proud to be leading on important legislation right now in Congress that will create more jobs, create more opportunities. I think of myself as a partner
the communities of Eastern Washington, a partner in moving forward on issues and on projects that are going to create more jobs, create more opportunities. And with that, I'll open it up for questions and look forward to the discussion.
All right, Congresswoman, we'll now go to, well, it doesn't have a name, unfortunately, but go to someone with a question on Fairchild. The gentleman with a question on Fairchild there.
Yeah. Hi, Cathy. This is Jack Driscoll, and I live in Spokane. And I just want to know what you're doing to ensure that our multi-billion economic boon Fairchild Air Force Base stays open after the recent loss of the new tankers.
Right. Clearly, this is a top priority for me. Fairchild is our largest employer in Eastern Washington, and we're proud to have the airmen and women that work at Fairchild and serve in the military. It is a super tanker base, and yes, we were disappointed that we didn't get the KC-46s. The Air Force has assured me that Fairchild has a bright future, that Fairchild is strategically located as you think about the Asia Pacific and its location in America. Fairchild has a great reputation, continues to get high marks. What the Air Force would like to do is to make Fairchild a super tanker base, and I'm excited about that. The mission, the mission at the SEER School, the Survival, Evasion, Resistance, and Escape training, the Wilderness training. All of this is important. The Survival School is very important to more and more within the Air Force. And so we just need to make sure that we're continuing not only to protect, but to expand missions. The Navy recently moved up its water training from Pensacola, Florida, to Spokane, to Fairchild. And we're just going to need to make sure that we continue to support Fairchild as a community, which the Pentagon loves to hear, and then look for those opportunities to expand the mission.
Thank you.
Thanks for that question. We'll now go to a question from Philip, who's got a question on taxes. Philip, go ahead.
Thank you, Cathy, for taking my call. I'm just curious on your thoughts about the fair tax. And, I just got to let off some steam here.
Okay.
It sucks. And, it's just not me. It's everyone I talk to. We're sick of being taxed to death. Every pay stub I get about $800 taken out. That's a lot of money. $800 is a lot of money. It's about 3 days work for me. And, just the recent one, I worked about 20 hours overtime, and I barely made an extra $100 out of it, maybe $200. But I'm just curious. I know you've been in office for years, but is there any motivation to get people together and eliminate taxes?
Absolutely. This is part of our agenda. It's part of our plan between now and August. The top priority for us to enact tax reform, both individual tax reform and corporate tax reform. We need to bring down tax rates. We need to close loopholes. We need to simplify the tax code. It's become way too costly, way too burdensome. One of the best things that we could do to get our economy growing. We have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. When you think about what that means to job creation. Individually, it is so complicated that you can't really fill out your own tax forms yourself. You have to hire somebody. Our goal is for you to be able to file your taxes on a postcard. 3 rates, simplified, and allowing you to have more money in your pocket, believing that you can make the best decisions for those dollars.
All right, we'll go now next. A gentleman with a question on the protest. Sir, are you available?
Yes, I am.
Go for it.
Good evening, Ms. McMorris. I want to say thank you for your service to our state and our country, first of all.
I want to know what your plan is for the protests that are going to be launched against you in Spokane on Thursday and in Walla Walla on Friday.
Well, everyone has the right to free speech, and so those that want to come out have the right to do so. For me, I view my role as a representative as to be accessible, to be available, to get around this district, and that's what I make a priority. I think that it's fundamental to being a representative, is to get around this district. There's 10 counties, and to meet with a variety of people, and I do that in a variety of ways. Meeting with people, whether it's one-on-one, small groups, coffees with Cathy. We had 2 coffees with Cathy this afternoon, focused on the Affordable Care Act, and with people who had very differing views on the ACA. But I believe that hosting those kind of meetings allows for a constructive dialogue. And that is my goal. I learn as I listen to people from all different perspectives. And then I also have a responsibility to lead, and to lead in a way that's going to make a difference in Eastern Washington. And I'm proud to have joined in introducing legislation to protect those with pre-existing conditions recently. I'm leading on getting graduate medical education to Eastern Washington so that we can train more doctors and get the residencies in Eastern Washington. I'm excited about the medical schools, but now we need the residencies so that these students can do their residencies in Eastern Washington, whether it's in hospitals throughout Eastern Washington or the Indian reservations or the VA, and help meet an important need. I am a problem solver, and I want to be a partner in addressing these issues. And so that's my plan.
Thanks for that question. We'll now go to a question from Rick, who's got a question on uninsurance rates and Obamacare. Rick, go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. It's actually Sandy, but we'll go ahead. According to a raw.gov publication under Obamacare, the total uninsured rate in Washington state declined by nearly 60%, from 14% to 5.8%. The Republicans' apparent proposed alternative will reduce premiums for wealthy people, but it will increase premiums for lower-income Washingtonians, including the majority of people who live in your district. My question is, what are you going to do to guarantee that low-income families who have insurance under Obamacare will still be able to afford insurance under a new plan?
Right. And we're still working on putting this plan together. I don't want to see the rug pulled out from underneath anyone. And I think I would disagree with some of the facts that you laid out there. Despite the well-intentions of Obamacare, it has not fulfilled the promises. And what we're seeing is that premiums are going up. We're seeing copays go up, deductibles go up. We have fewer plans, counties that only have one plan available. And I believe that our shared goal as it comes to health care, which is personal, and it's personal to all of us, is that we will have people that have access to quality and affordable health care no matter where they live. So our plan, and you asked specifically about some of the low income, but it is for those that are on Medicaid, the Medicaid expansion. We want to give them certainty that they will continue to have access to that important safety net. We're looking at advanceable tax credits for people as a commitment to ensuring that everyone will have health insurance. So an advanceable monthly tax credit that would be dedicated to helping cover the cost of health insurance. That's a commitment. As I mentioned, I've joined in supporting legislation to cover those with pre-existing conditions. And we're working right now to make this a transition to what will be a system that provides more options, more choices, lower cost, and really meets people's healthcare needs in a 21st century fashion. I wanted to lead the world in healthcare delivery and be the model for the world. And that's why this debate is so important, and that's why hearing from people is so important.
Appreciate the question, Sandy. We'll now go to Davis, who has a question on any future refugee community meetings. Davis, go ahead.
Hi, Davis is actually my last name. My first name is Erin. Congresswoman McMorris Rodgers, I wanted to thank you. I read in the Spokesman that you met with World Relief and other people who work with refugees in our community today, and so I wanted to thank you for doing that. My question for you is, I was at the rally with refugees at Gonzaga last week, and I was very moved by the stories of refugees who have settled in our community. But I'm also aware that since the executive order by President Trump, even though it's held up in the courts now, that the atmosphere in our country towards refugees, towards members of our Muslim community, has been hostile. And I've talked to some people among our community who have felt like the president and his executive order is not a positive disruptor in their lives, but they feel quite vulnerable. And so I was wondering if you would do anything to clarify the already stringent process that refugees have to go through to get here, and to also reach out to those people in our community and talk to them and reassure them.
Sure. And part of that happened today. I heard stories of some refugees that had been able to resettle in Spokane, and they are very compelling stories. It's really, they're individuals that have been through a lot, have been very courageous, and now they're very proud to be American citizens. Yes, it's very unfortunate that the way the executive order was rolled out, that it created a lot of confusion. And I am hopeful that as we move forward, that the administration will provide some clarity in a way that will address some of the fears and the concerns that have been raised. This whole issue was really brought to the forefront following the Paris attacks a year ago around Thanksgiving, and some of those that had participated in the attacks had been refugees, and it raised some questions. And we were briefed by the security agencies during a briefing in Washington D.C., a security briefing, where there were concerns raised as to the vetting processes that related to the refugee program. And that is what is behind, that was why the House took action immediately following that briefing, or within a few days. We just called for a pause so that we could review the vetting process and to ensure that legislation did not pass the Senate. But that is what my understanding is of the executive order and what President Trump is calling for. It's just to give time to review and to ensure that the vetting process is one that really ensures the safety of America. But today it was good just to hear from some that are involved in resettlement efforts here in Spokane, whether it was World Relief or the others, and to hear directly from them some of the challenges that they are facing, as well as they're just hearing the challenges, and also hearing from the refugees themselves as to their journey to come to America.
Great, Aaron. Thank you for that question. We'll now go to a question from Ron, who has a question on Medicaid. Ron, go ahead.
Cathy, Ron Rainier from Stevens County.
Hi,
How are you?
I'm
Hey,
well. How are
I've been
you?
a supporter and fan of yours for, since the mid-'90s. And
Oh, boy.
we've talked about this before, but just making sure that those that hear on the call that understand that the Medicaid expansion for our rural area in Monterey County is really essential. And this is part of the Obamacare, but it really is one of those things that has really impacted, our rural communities. Just making sure that what do you think the future of expansion is?
Right. Well, and I certainly recognize that, the impact that it's had on Eastern Washington, the Medicaid expansion. What we're looking at right now is a block grant for Medicaid. And this has been, and it's a belief that the states can do a better job of really setting the priorities and determining how that important safety net should be structured. Governor Inslee just last year, under the Affordable Care Act, he requested a Medicaid waiver, and was granted that under their innovative grant. And I guess my thought is that instead of a state having to go to the federal government and ask, "So can I make some changes here?" Our idea is as a state to just have that flexibility, and they should have. And they do need the support. Medicaid is a state and federal funded program. So for those states that have Medicaid expansion, what we're looking at is a per capita honoring the Medicaid expansion, and those that have joined, and on a per capita basis, then the federal government is committed to helping support that program at the state level. But we also think that for many that are on part of the Medicaid expansion, they are able-bodied working adults, unlike the rest of Medicaid that is more the vulnerable, whether it's women and children, those with disabilities, seniors, that the Medicaid expansion is a population that if there were more plans and options available in the marketplace, that they would actually be able to, get plans that meet their needs outside of Medicaid, and that it would protect Medicaid, which is a critical lifeline for some of our most vulnerable, to really be focused on meeting their needs. Unfortunately, you even have people that are on waiting lists that, in my mind, should be priority to get into Medicaid, because of the expansion, focusing on a population that I'd like to think could eventually get coverage in the marketplace.
Great. Thanks for that question, Ron. We now have a question from Caitlin, who has a question on rural ambulances. Caitlin, go ahead.
I think you meant Addie. So this is my question. Because at times rural communities are overlooked, my question concerns rural emergency services. It has come to my attention that rural ambulance services are so underfunded that they are being forced to consider closing Deer Park Ambulance specifically. What steps can you take to ensure that these life-saving services remain in rural communities, and is there a federal program that could assist areas like ours that do not have the access to services like cities do?
Right. Good question. I recognize that this has been a huge issue, especially in Perry, Stevens, and Monterey counties. I believe that there is a fix underway at the state level that State Senator Shelley Short is working on a reimbursement within Medicaid that would help alleviate the cost so that ambulance services would be made available again in those counties.
Great. Thank you for that. We now have a question from Beverly, who has a question on the protest. Beverly, go ahead. Beverly, are you there?
Hi. Well, maybe you took the ID off my phone. Actually, it was Larry, and I first wanted to say how much we appreciate Cathy. She's always been there for us Always anxious to vote for her. But no, we hear a lot of rumble about protests coming up, and I thought that question had already been answered. Maybe I'm wrong about the 28th of this month.
Well, I kind of answered it. If you have any other questions, I'd be happy to.
So I think you said there was one in Walla Walla, and so what can you tell us about? Do you know anything that's supposed to happen, or what these people's complaint is? I can't. On the 28th.
I think I'll leave it up to them.
Well, I'm sorry, Cathy. No, I just thought maybe
that's good.
Wind of it, and so if there's any way we can help you, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thanks for that question. We now have a question from, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but Elena with a question on teaching.
Yeah, my name is Elena, and I'm a public school teacher. And my question is, I know that even though I live in a relatively conservative area, education is definitely at the forefront in Eastern Washington. And I'm concerned with the appointment of the new education secretary that seems to want to privatize our schools and go mainly to charter and voucher programs. How you're going to stand up to make sure that our special education students and our Title I students are able to receive the services that they need in the state of Washington.
Okay, well, good question. And you may be aware I have a son with special needs, and so I have learned firsthand how IDEA works. And I am a strong proponent of the federal government fully funding IDEA. When I am grateful as a parent for IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and believe that the federal government should step up and actually fulfill the promise that was made that they would provide 40% of the funding for that. Unfortunately, I think the federal government, the highest it's ever gotten is about 20%. And so the burden is really on the local school district. And I have requested an opportunity to sit down with Betsy DeVos, and this is one of the issues that I'd like to talk to her about. I'd also bring to your attention the Student Success Act that we passed last year, which really returned a lot of the decision-making as it relates to education to local school districts. And I'm a believer that the best decision for education and how best to educate our kids will be made at the local level, that will be made at the local school districts with school board members and parents, and that they should be empowered to make those best decisions for themselves. So the Student Success Act really provided a lot of flexibility and sent more of the money down to the local school districts without the traditional strings attached, so that the local school district could prioritize and decide how best to spend those dollars. And my impression, at least, is that it's been pretty well received.
Great, thanks for that question. We'll now go to Margaret, who has a question on health care for children. Margaret, go ahead.
Thank you. My question is asking if you would consider a modification to the block grant approach and treat child health care and maternity care as totally separate. The idea behind block grants are all states, know best. But I looked up, and infant mortality in Washington State is 4.9 babies die in infancy for every 1,000. Idaho, 5.5 die. Alabama, 8.17. France in Europe, that's far better. It has 3.0. And as you correctly said, we should be pushing for global excellence, and we're a long way from there. So what I'd ask is if you could use your leadership to help Congress think about something like a child maternal Medicare without the 20% deductible, where we so value the life of children and healthy birth that we consider it a federal obligation independent of what the state does.
Well, I certainly view Medicaid as a very important safety net, especially for our most vulnerable, which would be the kids and the maternal care for especially those single or low-income moms. I have been a supporter of the Children's Health Insurance Program, CHIP. I'm supporting a bill called the 8 Kids Act, which is really helping kids within Medicaid have access to coordinate care when they're some of the most complex cases. I'm open to new models and look for those opportunities to promote the models that I believe are going to result in the best outcomes at the lowest price.
Great, Margaret. Thanks for that question. We'll now go to a question from Steve, who has a question on the Republican replacement for Obamacare. Steve, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I spent some time today on Paul Ryan's website reading the Republican plan or his plan for Medicare. And it stresses things like Medicare exchanges and premium support. And when I hear those phrases, it sounds an awful lot like the Affordable Care Act, which had exchanges and support mechanisms. And people have difficulty understanding that the Affordable Care Act and Obamacare are exactly the same. People in rural towns all through eastern Washington are very confused about health care. So if you were speaking right now to the people in your hometown, which I think is Kettle Falls, how would you explain to them why the Ryan plan or the Republican plan for Medicare is so different than Medicare or Obamacare?
Wow. Well, I think it's important to first of all, I think it's important for you to know that Medicare reform is not on the table at this point. We are focused on the future of healthcare, health insurance, the insurance marketplace, and Medicaid reform. And I think part of the difference is because of Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act was at the root of it. It was penalties that were imposed. It was, and it's resulted in less choices, less options for people. But I think it's most important that you recognize that we're not dealing with Medicare reform right now. What we're trying to do is move from the Affordable Care Act to reforms that will provide more choices, more plans, health savings accounts, the tax incentives, the refundable, advanceable tax credits, the commitment to those with pre-existing conditions, the moving to a system that I like to describe it as a backpack, where you get to decide what's in your plan. You can take it from job to job, from state to state, so you have the portability, if that makes sense.
Great. Thanks for that question. We'll now go to a question from Gary, who's asking about bridging divides between different political parties. Gary, go ahead. Gary, are you there? We must have missed him. All right, we'll now go to a question from James, who's asking about pre-existing conditions. James, go ahead.
Hi there, Cathy. Thanks for coming on this, and thanks for your time. You mentioned that you really support repeal and replace. You talked about the importance of covering people with pre-existing conditions. With so many people counting on access to health care, why are you so intent on repealing Obamacare and not fixing it? And as a follow-up to Sandy's question, her numbers look pretty right. the uninsured rate in Washington State went from around 16% to 9%, 16.01% to 9.07% before and after Obamacare. So what other parts of Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act do you like? Being able to keep dependents on your plan up to 26, the individual mandate, the Medicaid expansion. Sounds like you thought a lot about Medicaid. So what's your take?
I don't dispute that the uninsured numbers have come down in Washington State. However, premiums have gone up. The co-pays have gone up. The deductibles have gone up. The number of plans that people have has gone down. The number of choices. In many counties, you're down to one choice. And that's where I believe that the ACA has failed to deliver on the promises. And that's why I think we need to repeal and replace it with reforms that are going to result in there being more access, more choices, more affordable choices, more plans that will help individuals and families have plans that will best meet their needs. I would like to see health savings accounts expanded. I do believe it is important that we guarantee those with pre-existing conditions that they will have options available in the marketplace. And that is part of the legislation that I introduced last week with some of my colleagues. So that's why I believe that we need to repeal and replace the law.
Great, thanks for that question. We'll now go to a question from Claudia, who has a question about fake news. Claudia, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So I appreciate your time and the opportunity to ask this question. Can you please speak to the president and others using the term fake news, especially when it really comes to hard-hitting questions? It seems really easy to say fake news instead of answering the question. In reality, you have the president, Sean Spicer, Kellyanne Conway, all releasing statements that are false. Please tell me that you support a free and independent press that will ask hard questions and not be labeled fake news.
Well, I absolutely support a free and independent press. I think it's foundational to our democracy. There has been a lot of noise recently, and unfortunately there's been stories that are not true that have been reported as if they were true. And that's where we need to make sure that the press is responsible and that the press is reporting in a way that will result in people getting the truth. So I think the press also needs to be held accountable for that.
Thanks for that question, Claudia. We'll now go to a question from Bill, who's got a question on rules and regulations. Bill, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Bill Johnson at Chattaroy, Washington. I have a couple trucks, and I have a shooting supply business, and I go in Washington and Idaho and Montana and Oregon to registered trap shoots, and I sell shooting supplies to trap shooters that shoot clay targets. In March of last year, the Department of Transportation came into my house, and I have a home-owned business permit, and they audited my business, and they have rules and regulations that they don't advise you of, and the rules and regulations that I was infraction on does not affect society and will not affect the safety of fellow Americans, and yet these rules and regulations that they make are affecting business. I have 4 employees that depend upon me for a livelihood, and it would have taken about 30 days for me to comply with the rules and regulations that they called to my attention. But instead, since the 3rd of March, my trucks have been out of service over rules and regulations that aren't going to make any American any safer in the United States. And I think the swamp in Washington, D.C. definitely needs to be drained. I think there's lots of regulations in our society that is affecting business, and it's a sad thing when people that want to supply jobs to our citizens are held back by government regulations that don't benefit anybody. The mining industry is another one that is really in trouble with rules and regulations. The Bureau of Mines, Hecla Mining Company over in Idaho, I think paid $1.78 million in fines last year, and most of the fines are fines that are trivial, that aren't going to benefit anybody. Now, I agree with any rule or any regulation that makes the highways safer for the public. But when they came into my house and went through my books, my truck was not out of service and hasn't been put out of service except for the fact that things like a home security security file, a homeland security file, a payroll file, maintenance file, those type of things I had, but they didn't meet with the specifications that the Department of Transportation has set forth. As an example,
Okay.
excuse
we have
me.
a lot of questions to get to.
Okay,
so,
let me.
I think I'm getting the gist of it. Do you have a question? Oh. Well, just know that there, I'm very concerned about the number of regulations, the record regulations that we have seen, especially in recent years, that have the force of law. Obviously, they're written by federal agencies, rules and regulations, but the way that they're implemented, they have the force of law. And I think a lot of these should come back to the law-making branch. That if it's a public policy decision, if it's a change in a law, it should be introduced and debated by the lawmakers, the elected representatives of the people that are accountable to the people. And so this gets to a balance of power issue between the three branches of government. But instead of the executive branch writing rules and regulations, if they think the law should be changed, they should come back to the legislative branch, the House and the Senate, and work through that process, which allows the people to be involved, make their voices heard, and ultimately hold someone accountable for a decision they make over what the law is going to be. So that's why you've seen us in the first few weeks of this new Congress making it a priority to repeal some laws. The Trump administration has put a freeze on rules until they can review them. But at the end of the day, I support legislation like the REINS Act. I'm very excited about this legislation that would require proposed rules and regulations to come back to the House and the Senate for approval, because I think you need that check and balance, and you want the people, through their representatives, to have the final say.
Great, thanks for that question. We now have a question from Alvin with a question on cutting spending. Go ahead.
Okay, I have a quick question, and the question is, what's going on over there at Kettle Falls with the boat people and the federal government? It sounds like two 6-year-olds arguing over marbles. Now, my other comment is, when are you going to cut spending today? You can do it. I have to do it. Every other citizen has to do it. And how can you look at your family and your friends and the people that you represent and know that you're saddling people with eternal debt from this day forward until the day we die? That's wrong. You can cut spending. Agree. You could cut spending if you will. I have to. Every other citizen has to. Thank you.
Very good. Well, it's big. That's why I support the balanced budget amendment. I think federal government needs to balance its budget. And I think that the House and the Senate should be required to have to balance their budget, set priorities, live within their means. As far as the Kettle Falls Marina, I think it's just a wrong decision that they made to not renew that contract and to say that it's going to close in April. So we immediately have asked for an extension of that contract. I'm anxious for the new Secretary of Interior to get in place so that I can call and talk to him and hopefully talk some sense into them.
Great. Now we have a question from Kirsten with a question on the Constitution. Go ahead.
Hi, Representative McMorris Rodgers. You mentioned earlier today that you feel that we should focus on what unites us, and I believe what we have in common is respect for the Constitution. I just want to review a couple recent actions of President Trump that the Constitution addresses. In early December, after his election, President Trump took a phone call from the president of Taiwan, and this was against protocol, U.S. protocol, that had been in place since 1979. In mid-February, just a couple weeks ago, President Trump flip-flopped and announced support for a one China policy. A few days later, China granted a trademark to the Trump brand after the application had languished for 10 years. This granting of the trademark appears, in fact, to be against Chinese law. The emoluments clause of the Constitution, our highest law of the land, that comes to us directly from the Founding Fathers, prevents presidents and other elected officials from benefiting financially from their position. How are you, as our representative in Congress, going to ensure that President Trump does not engage in corrupt practices while he is in public service?
Well, I think it's a very good question, and it's one that in which I think Congress will have to do its job to ensure that there's a balance of power and that we're holding the president accountable for upholding the Constitution.
Great. Thanks for that question. We now have a question from Bill, who's asking about pre-existing conditions. Bill, go ahead. Bill, are you there? Okay.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we seem to be having some technical difficulties in pulling up the questions. Oh, maybe, no? So, we're going to have to wrap it up. And I just want to say thanks to everyone for joining me tonight. Good questions. This is the way representative government works. And I appreciate hearing from you. I appreciate you taking the time to join me and ask questions. And when it comes to the legislation, I want to hear from you and continue to work to make better decisions for the people of Eastern Washington. So thank you very much. Have a good night.
The teleforum has ended.